My name is Stacy. Right now, I'm standing in my condo, watching as Lisa, my daughter-in-law, grabs her bag in a huff. The room is thick with an awkward silence, only broken by the soft rattle of the sea breeze through the slightly open window. The nerve of her to think she could just take over my home. It all started a few days ago. I was on my balcony, just like I often do in the morning. The ocean was rolling in, the same rhythmic dance it's done for years, long before Lisa ever entered my son Jake's life. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee but hadn't taken a sip. The peace was almost palpable, a reward after a lifetime of hard work. I was finally at ease, my mind free from the constant chatter. Then my phone rang. It was Lisa. I answered, expecting something mundane, like a question about the thermostat or a thank you for the latest family dinner I'd hosted. But her voice came through sharp and rushed. Stacy, my folks just got into town. They're staying here at the condo. It'd be best if you went to a hotel for a few days. They need their space. I laughed softly at first, not because it was funny. My mind was just struggling to accept what I'd heard. I looked around my balcony, the beautiful furniture I'd picked out with so much care, the railing I'd had replaced last year. This was my home. I'd bought it after working 2 jobs to raise Jake on my own when his dad left us when Jake was only 5. Lisa didn't stop. You're so easy going, Stacy. And let's be real, this place will be Jake's one day, so it's basically ours already. That was the moment I felt a shift inside me. It wasn't anger, not tears. It was a cold, hard realization that to her, I was nothing more than an inconvenience. I tightened my grip on the phone and said calmly, "All right, I'll be out in an hour." She thanked me like I'd done her a huge favor. Little did she know that was just the start. The taxi ride to the motel felt endless. I watched the familiar streets go by, the trees blurring together. On the outside, I looked calm, just another older woman going on a short trip. But inside, I was seething. This wasn't about space or privacy. It was about her sense of entitlement. I checked into the motel with my driver's license and a credit card that I'd earned through years of toil. The young woman at the counter smiled politely and gave me a key card. She had no idea who I was, and that anonymity was a strange form of relief. The room was small but clean, with a bed, a desk, and a single window facing the parking lot. I set my suitcase down and stood there, listening to the air conditioner's faint hum. It was then that the full weight of what had happened hit me. Losing the condo for a few days wasn't the issue. I could easily afford a hotel, even 10 of them. What hurt was how quickly Lisa had dismissed me, as if my presence was an annoyance. And what felt like a knife in my heart was Jake's silence. I'd worked so hard for that boy. I'd skipped countless holidays, worn the same old clothes for years so he could have a good education and nice things. And now, he didn't say a word when his wife pushed me out of my own home. My phone buzzed. It was Lisa again. Do you know where the spare blankets are? My mom also wants to know about the electricity bill and the Wi-Fi password. I stared at the screen in disbelief. Less than 2 hours after forcing me out, she was already treating me like her servant. I didn't reply right away. Instead, I opened social media. There were pictures of Lisa's parents on my balcony, looking so comfortable, like they owned the place. Lisa had captioned one of the photos, "Such a perfect family spot. So many plans for this place." I felt a knot in my stomach. I'd always thought my generosity in hosting family gatherings would earn me respect, but I was clearly wrong. I replied to her message later, keeping my tone neutral. "I'll send the info when I'm ready." The rest of the afternoon, I walked along a public beach near the motel. It was noisy, with kids running around and vendors shouting. But the ocean was the same. It was a free, wild thing that didn't belong to anyone. Sitting on the sand, I thought about all the times I'd stayed quiet to keep the peace. How often I'd swallowed my discomfort to avoid conflict. And I realized that silence doesn't solve anything. It just postpones the inevitable. That evening, I got several missed calls from Jake. I listened to his voicemail. Mom, Lisa didn't mean it like that. Her parents are just used to a certain way of life. Can we talk? I closed my eyes. Did that certain way of life include pushing me out of my home? I didn't call him back that night. I needed him to think about what he'd let happen. I opened my laptop and looked at the screenshots I'd taken of Lisa's social media posts. I saved them in a folder marked with the date. I wasn't sure what I was going to do yet, but I knew I wasn't going to let this go. I was done being the doormat. The next morning, I got another message from Lisa. We moved some of your stuff into the storage closet so my parents would be more comfortable. I hope you don't mind. I clenched my teeth. She didn't even ask. She just assumed she could do whatever she wanted in my home. I took more screenshots of the new posts on social media. They were talking about renovating my condo, making it theirs. This wasn't about revenge. It was about setting things straight. I finally called my old friend and attorney, Max. He'd been my legal advisor for years. We'd gone to law school together before life took us different paths. He knew me well, knew I wasn't one to make hasty decisions. Max answered, Stacy, you don't usually call this early. Everything okay? I told him exactly what had happened, leaving out nothing. There was a long pause on the other end. She told you to leave your own property? He said slowly. Yes, and she's acting like her parents have every right to be there, I replied. Max took a deep breath. Look, Stacy, no one can force you out of your home. Not your son, not your daughter-in-law, and certainly not her parents. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. I know, but how do I stop this? I asked. He said, don't let your emotions get the better of you. Document everything. Stay calm and speak with facts, not anger. I emailed him all the screenshots. An hour later, he called back. They're making public claims of ownership. That could be a problem if they start making major changes, he said. I asked what to do next. He told me to wait and let them talk more. Waiting wasn't easy for me. I'd always been a problem solver, but this time, waiting was a strategy. That afternoon, Jake called again. Mom, things got a bit out of hand. Lisa's parents are just excited. Can we talk later? I said calmly, later is fine. He asked if I was upset. I looked at the motel walls and said, I'm paying attention, and there's a difference. He didn't know what to say. After we hung up, I thought about all the little slights over the years. The snide comments about my clothes, the way Lisa always interrupted me at family dinners. None of it was accidental. That evening, Lisa sent another message. My parents might stay longer than expected. I smiled for the first time since all this started. The longer they stayed and the more they acted like owners, the easier it would be to expose the truth. The next morning, I dressed carefully, not to look fancy but to feel strong. Max picked me up outside the motel. The drive back to the condo was quiet. As we approached, I could see from the parking lot that there were more cars than usual. It was clear that Lisa and her parents had settled in. The elevator ride up felt like forever. I could hear laughter and music even before the doors opened. When they did, Max glanced at me. You don't have to say much, he murmured. I nodded. I've already said what needed to be said. He rang the doorbell. The music stopped abruptly. Lisa opened the door, a drink in her hand. Her smile faded when she saw me, then her eyes flicked to Max. What are you doing here? She asked. I didn't answer. I just walked past her into the condo. The place looked different. Furniture was moved, my personal items were pushed aside. There was a feeling of intrusion in the air. Jake was near the kitchen counter, his face tense. His in-laws, Mr. and Mrs. Thompson stood up from the couch, clearly shocked. Jake said softly, "Mom, we weren't expecting you back today." I replied, "I never said I was leaving for good." Max closed the door behind us and put his briefcase on the dining table. The atmosphere in the room immediately changed. This was no longer a misunderstanding, it was a serious conversation. Lisa quickly regained her composure. "This is unnecessary. We're just having a good time. You could have called first." I retorted, "I did call. You told me to leave." Mrs. Thompson stepped forward, looking confused. "Stacy, dear, we had no idea this would cause a problem." Lisa said this place was part of the family's future. Max slowly opened his briefcase and took out a folder. "That seems to be the source of the confusion. This condo is legally owned by Stacy. Sole ownership. There's no agreement for future transfer." Lisa interrupted, "I thought it was understood. Jake will inherit it someday." Max met her gaze. "Someday isn't a legal term." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "Lisa, you told your parents Mom agreed to this." Lisa turned to him, annoyed. "You know how your mom is. She doesn't need this big place." I felt a pang in my chest but kept my voice steady. "This is my home, and I will not be pushed out." Mrs. Thompson looked at me directly. "Stacy, did you promise to give them this condo?" "No, I never did," I replied. There was a heavy silence. Mr. Thompson crossed his arms. "Then why are we here?" I said, "Because your daughter invited you and told you things that weren't true." Lisa laughed harshly. "This is being blown out of proportion." Max reached into his briefcase again and placed some printed pages on the table. "These are public posts where they claim the condo as their own, with plans for renovations. All documented." Mrs. Thompson picked up a page, her hands shaking slightly. Her expression changed from confusion to disbelief. "You told us this place was basically yours," she said to Lisa, her voice quiet. Lisa didn't say a word. Jake looked down at the floor. Max spoke up again. "At this point, Stacy is formally asking anyone without her permission to leave the property." Lisa's face turned red. "You can't be serious." "I am," I said firmly. "This is my home." Mrs. Thompson stood up suddenly. "Mr. Thompson, we're leaving." Lisa looked at her in disbelief. "Mom, no. This isn't right." Mrs. Thompson's voice was shaking. "We were misled. This isn't how we were raised." Mr. Thompson picked up their bags without a word. As they passed me, Mrs. Thompson paused. "I'm sorry, Stacy. We really didn't know." "I believe you," I replied. When they left, the room felt empty. Lisa turned to me, her eyes blazing with anger. "This isn't over." I looked right back at her. "No, it isn't." For the first time, I saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Jake was still standing near the kitchen, looking defeated. Max calmly gathered his documents. He looked at me and asked, "Are you okay?" I replied, "I am." And for the first time since this whole mess started, I meant it. Max then turned to Lisa. "You'll need to collect your things and leave today. Any remaining items can be sorted out later through proper channels." Lisa scoffed. "You're treating me like a stranger." Max didn't respond. Jake finally looked up. "Lisa, we need to talk." Lisa snapped, "Not now. This is between me and your mother." Jake surprised me by saying, "No, this is between us." Max excused himself and went out onto the balcony, closing the door behind him. The sound of the waves came through, a reminder that the world outside was still going on. Lisa turned to Jake, frustrated. "Are you really going to side with her?" Jake rubbed his face. You told your parents this place was ours. What did you tell them that made sense? For who? The question hung in the air. I watched Jake carefully. He wasn't angry or loud. He just looked tired and disappointed. Lisa then turned back to me. You don't even use this place that much. I replied calmly, that doesn't make it yours. Jake took a deep breath. Lisa, you should go stay with your parents. Her eyes widened. You're choosing her over me. I'm choosing honesty, Jake said. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. Lisa stared at him for a moment, as if she was going to argue, but then she just shook her head, grabbed her bag, and stormed out, muttering, "This isn't over." But her words lacked the confidence they once had. When the door closed behind her, the silence in the room felt different. It was no longer heavy, it was real. Jake sank onto the couch and covered his face with his hands. I'm sorry, Mom. I should have stopped this earlier. I sat beside him and put my hand on his shoulder. You didn't start this, but you're responsible for what you do next. He nodded slowly. A few minutes later, Max came back in. He gave Jake a nod and said, I'll be in touch if there's anything else. For now, the matter is settled. After Max left, Jake and I spent the rest of the afternoon putting the condo back in order. We moved the furniture back to its place, put my things where they belonged, and opened the windows to let the fresh sea air in. As evening fell, Jake joined me on the balcony. The sky was a beautiful mix of orange and pink, and the ocean was catching the last of the sunlight. Jake said softly, I didn't realize how much I'd been ignoring, not just with Lisa but with you. I watched the horizon and said, we all ignore things until they can't be ignored anymore. He nodded. I don't know what happens next. I replied, you don't need all the answers today. That night, after Jake went to bed, I sat alone in the living room. The condo was quiet once again, but this time the silence was peaceful and earned. I thought about how often kindness is misinterpreted as weakness and how silence is seen as agreement. For too long, women like me are expected to step aside and be quiet. But I'd learned that standing up for myself isn't unkind, it's the truth. And the truth, even if it disrupts the false sense of peace, is the only way to restore real peace. The next morning, sunlight filled the condo. I made a cup of coffee in my kitchen and stepped barefoot onto the balcony. The ocean looked exactly the same as always, but I was different. I was no longer the woman who would let others push her around. I was me, and this was my home.